The sound of tearing silk echoed in the upscale Chicago boutique. The saleswoman sneered, stating my body was far too heavy for their exclusive couture. I adjusted my glasses, remaining perfectly calm, but before I could respond, a dark, terrifying voice froze the room. "You are fired," he growled. The rain was pouring hard against the glass windows of the boutique on Michigan Avenue, mirroring the cold reception I was receiving inside. "My name is Clara Jenkins. I am a senior forensic accountant, the kind of woman who can find a missing $10 million buried under 20 layers of international shell companies in less than an hour. My mind is a steel trap of numbers, ledgers, and offshore routing codes. It is this exact skill that brought me into the dangerous, blood-soaked orbit of Dominic Russo, the head of the Russo Syndicate, the most feared mafia family in Chicago. But to the rest of the world, and especially to the painfully thin, sharply dressed women who patrolled the high-end boutiques of the Magnificent Mile, I was just a woman taking up too much space. I stood in the center of Maison de Rive, holding a breathtaking emerald green evening gown against my chest. The fabric was heavy, luxurious, and completely out of my usual comfort zone. Usually, I hid my soft curves, my thick thighs, and my rounded stomach under shapeless business suits. But I needed this dress for the annual Syndicate Charity Gala tomorrow night, a massive event Dominic had absolutely insisted I attend. He had told me I was to be the guest of honor, a public reward for uncovering a massive embezzlement ring operating inside his legitimate shipping fronts on the Chicago River. "Miss, I am going to have to ask you to put that down," the saleswoman said. Her name tag read Chloe. Her voice was sharp, coated in a venomous layer of fake politeness that I had heard 1,000 times before. "The silk is incredibly delicate, and our sizing in that particular European designer is quite unforgiving. We do not carry anything in the back that would accommodate your proportions." I did not flinch. I had spent my entire life dealing with people who looked at my physical form and immediately dismissed my intellect and my worth. I calmly looked at Chloe, then glanced around the pristine, overly perfumed, and utterly empty store. My analytical brain immediately went to work. I noted the outdated seasonal inventory hanging on the racks, the excessive number of sales staff standing around doing nothing, and the slight layer of dust on the secondary jewelry displays near the register. "I understand the sizing can be complex," I replied, my voice perfectly even and measured, completely void of the emotional breakdown she was clearly hoping to provoke. "However, I know my exact measurements, and a size 16 in this specific bias cut should fit perfectly. I would like to try it on, please." Chloe let out a harsh, mocking laugh, looking over her shoulder to ensure her co-workers were watching the spectacle. "A size 16? Perhaps in a discount department store out in the suburbs, honey. But here? That dress will rip the moment you try to pull it over your hips. You are simply too heavy for that dress. It is a masterpiece meant to drape over a model, not stretch over a liability. I suggest you look across the street. They have a lovely maternity and plus-size section that might suit your needs better. We just cannot risk you damaging merchandise you clearly cannot afford." The insult hung heavily in the air. The other sales associates snickered quietly from behind the marble counter. A flush of heat rose to my cheeks, an involuntary human reaction to public humiliation. But I refused to let them see me crumble. I drew upon the exact same icy detachment I used when auditing hostile, aggressive executives who tried to intimidate me during corporate raids. I stood my ground, calculating the astronomical rent on this prime property, versus their obvious lack of daily foot traffic. They were operating at a massive deficit, likely going under within the next financial quarter. I opened my mouth to calmly inform her of her impending unemployment due to retail bankruptcy. But the brass bell above the front door chimed. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly and violently. The air grew thick, heavy, and suffocatingly cold. The soft classical music playing overhead seemed to fade into a terrified, breathless silence. Dominic Russo stepped into the boutique. He was a terrifyingly handsome man, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that screamed old money and lethal, unchecked power. His dark eyes locked onto me instantly, scanning my face, reading the slight tension in my shoulders that I could never quite hide from him. Dominic never missed a single detail when it came to me. He was a monster to the criminal underworld, a ruthless killer who ruled the Chicago streets with an iron fist. But to me, he was a suffocating, deeply protective shadow. He had practically assigned his best enforcers to guard my apartment building. He monitored my diet to ensure I was eating enough when I worked late into the night tracing dirty money, and he looked at my soft, plush body like it was a sacred religious artifact meant to be worshipped. Dominic walked toward us. His heavy footsteps echoed menacingly on the marble floor. Beside him was his brutal underboss, Leo, a mountain of a man who looked like he tore bank vault doors off their hinges for exercise. "Is there a problem here, Clara?" Dominic asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a simultaneous shiver of fear and deep comfort down my spine. Chloe immediately transformed. The sneer vanished from her perfectly contoured face, replaced by a radiant, overly flirtatious smile. She recognized immense wealth instantly, even if she lacked the survival instincts to recognize the apex predator standing right in front of her. "Oh, absolutely no problem at all, sir," Chloe purred, stepping directly between Dominic and me, trying to capture his attention. "I was just explaining to this customer that our boutique specializes in exclusive haute couture. We were simply trying to direct her to a store more suited to her specific body type. We would hate for her to damage our highly expensive merchandise by forcing a fit that just is not biologically possible." Dominic stopped moving completely. He slowly turned his dark, empty gaze from me to Chloe. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. It was the kind of dead silence that always preceded a violent, destructive storm in the syndicate. I saw the thick muscle in his jaw feather as he clenched his teeth. "Damage the merchandise," Dominic repeated softly, his tone dangerously flat. "Yes, sir. As you can see, she is far too heavy for the delicate structuring of the bodice. We cater to a very specific elite clientele here in the city. We have to maintain our brand standards." Dominic did not shout. He did not raise his voice or make a sudden movement. He simply reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his encrypted phone. He dialed a single number and put it to his ear. His eyes never left Chloe, and the deadly, hollow emptiness in his stare finally caused the saleswoman's confident smile to falter and crack. "Buy this building," Dominic said into the phone, his voice echoing in the quiet store. "Yes, the entire retail block on this stretch of Michigan Avenue. I do not care what the asking price is. Pay double. I want the deed officially transferred into my holding company's name within the next 10 minutes. Get the lawyers on it right now." He hung up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket with slow, deliberate precision. Chloe stared at him, her mouth hanging open in absolute shock. The other sales associates had backed away completely, pressing themselves against the back walls as if trying to physically merge with the plaster to escape his wrath. You just bought the building? Chloe stammered, the color rapidly draining from her face until she looked ghostly pale. Dominic ignored her question. He stepped closer to her, invading her personal space, using his towering height and broad shoulders to cast a dark, suffocating shadow over her trembling frame. You looked at my woman, the woman whose sheer intellect dwarfs your entire miserable, shallow existence, and you decided to mock her body. You decided she was not worthy of a few yards of cheap, mass-produced fabric. Sir, I was just following store policy, Chloe whispered, her voice cracking with pure terror as she finally realized she had insulted the wrong woman. Store policy no longer matters, because the store no longer exists, Dominic stated coldly, delivering the sentence like a judge handing down an execution. Leo, the massive underboss, stepped forward instantly. Yes, boss. Liquidate this entire inventory, throw every single piece of clothing in the dumpsters out back, and set them on fire. Have the management company terminate the lease of this boutique immediately. And as for her, Dominic pointed a black leather-gloved finger directly at Chloe's chest. I want her permanently blacklisted from every retail, hospitality, and corporate position in the state of Illinois. If she tries to get a job pouring coffee at a gas station, I want that station shut down. Make sure she leaves this city with absolutely nothing. Yes, boss, Leo nodded, immediately pulling out his own phone and waving his hand. 4 more men in dark suits stepped into the boutique from the street and began ripping expensive dresses off the racks. Chloe began to sob loudly, pleading and begging for her job, apologizing frantically to me. But Dominic had already dismissed her from his reality. He turned his broad back on the weeping woman and stepped up to me. His terrifying, cold demeanor vanished in an instant, replaced by an intense, burning devotion that always left me breathless and weak in the knees. He reached out, his large, warm hands gently cupping my cheeks. His rough thumbs brushed over my cheekbones, wiping away a stray tear of overwhelming adrenaline I had not realized I shed. Did her words hurt you, Mia Cara? He whispered, his dark eyes searching mine frantically for any sign of deep emotional distress. I shook my head, taking a deep breath to maintain my calm, logical exterior. I was just doing the math on their overhead operating costs, Dominic. They were going to go completely bankrupt in 3 months anyway. Your hostile buyout was probably a financial mercy to the original owners. A dark, rumbling chuckle escaped his deep chest, the sound vibrating against the quiet chaos of the store being violently dismantled around us. Only you, Clara. Only you could be viciously insulted by a vapid stranger and immediately calculate their financial ruin in your brilliant head. God, I am completely obsessed with your beautiful brain. But I am equally, violently obsessed with your perfect body. He gently took the emerald green dress from my hands. He ran a hand over the heavy silk, examining it for a brief second, then tossed it carelessly over a nearby chair, discarding it like trash. Dominic, I needed a dress for the gala tomorrow, I protested softly, looking at the discarded garment. You will never wear something from a place that disrespected you, he replied firmly, his hands sliding down to grip my thick waist possessively. I have a private master tailor waiting at my penthouse right now. He has been working on a custom gown for you for the past 3 weeks, using your exact measurements. I was going to surprise you with it tonight after dinner, but since we are here, we might as well go home now. He wrapped his thick, powerful arm tightly around my waist, pulling my soft curves flush against his hard, muscular frame. I let out a soft gasp as the solid, heavy warmth of his body seeped through my sensible office clothes. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling my vanilla perfume deeply, as if I were oxygen, and he had been suffocating all day without me. They look at you, and they do not understand, Clara, Dominic murmured against my sensitive skin, his voice thick with dark, possessive desire. They see softness and they foolishly think it means weakness. They do not see the absolute, terrifying power you hold over me. They do not know that you hold the financial lifelines of the entire Chicago underworld in your beautiful, capable hands. And they certainly do not know that I would happily burn this entire city to the ground if someone made you shed a single tear. I leaned heavily into his embrace, feeling the rapid, steady beat of his heart against my chest. The noise of Chloe crying and the racks being torn down faded completely into the background. In his arms, I was not the heavy girl or the quiet accountant. I who was the center of his dark, violent universe. "Let us go home, Clara," Dominic said, turning me toward the front door while keeping me securely tucked under his arm. "We have a massive gala to prepare for. The Russo Syndicate needs to officially meet their true queen tomorrow night, and I need to show every dangerous, calculating man in that ballroom exactly who owns my soul." As we walked out into the freezing, pouring Chicago rain, a sleek black armored SUV was already waiting at the curb with the engine idling. Dominic ushered me inside quickly, shielding me from the harsh weather with his own massive body. The heavy armored door slammed shut, sealing us inside the quiet, luxurious leather interior. The engine roared to life, but as we pulled away from the magnificent mile, leaving the ruined boutique behind, I noticed the sudden, tense set of Dominic's jaw. The protective bubble around us was fragile, and I knew the gala tomorrow night was not just a simple celebration of my financial audit. I watched the city lights blur through the rain-slicked window. The rival syndicates from the East Coast were making aggressive moves on our shipping territory, and my recent forensic accounting had uncovered a hidden weakness in our own ranks that could trigger a full-scale, bloody mafia war. I rested my hand on Dominic's muscular thigh, feeling the cold steel of the heavy weapon concealed beneath his suit fabric. The ruined dress was the least of our problems. Tomorrow night, the real blood would flow. The penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan was a fortress of glass and steel, a quiet sanctuary far above the chaotic streets of Chicago. Dominic's master tailor, an elderly Italian man named Arturo, had worked absolute miracles in record time. The custom gown was a deep, midnight blue velvet that cascaded over my curves like liquid shadow. It cinched perfectly at my waist and accentuated the fullness of my hips, a stark contrast to the unforgiving, rigid structures of the boutique dresses I was used to being excluded from. The fabric was heavy, regal, and forgiving in all the right places. As I looked in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of Dominic's bedroom, I hardly recognized the dangerous, powerful woman staring back at me. I looked like I belonged in this dark world. Dominic entered the room, and the air immediately grew thick and heavy. He wore a custom black tuxedo that tailored perfectly to his massive shoulders, looking every inch the ruthless, untouchable king of the city's criminal underworld. He stepped quietly behind me, his dark gaze locked on our reflection in the glass. He reached out, his rough, warm fingers tracing the line of my bare shoulder, the touch sending a shockwave of heat straight through my chest. "You look like a queen, Clara," Dominic murmured, his voice a low, raspy vibration against my ear. "My queen. The entire city will kneel to you tonight, and if they do not, I will cut them down at the knees." We descended into the underground garage, and took his heavily armored convoy to the Palmer House Hilton in the Loop. The grand ballroom was dripping in crystal chandeliers and gold leaf, packed to the brim with the most dangerous men in the Midwest, their elegantly dressed wives, and their heavily armed security details. As Dominic and I walked through the towering mahogany double doors, the chaotic chatter of the room fell dead silent. Hundreds of eyes darted toward us, assessing, judging, and ultimately submitting to the sheer aura of violence Dominic projected. I felt the weight of their stares on my body, but I kept my posture straight and my chin high. I was not just here to look beautiful on his arm. I was here to work. My recent audit of the riverfront shipping fronts had revealed a glaring, highly sophisticated discrepancy. There were phantom shipments leaving ports in Brooklyn and arriving completely empty in Chicago. Someone deep within our ranks was systematically bleeding the Russo syndicate dry and funneling the stolen capital directly to our East Coast rivals. My prime suspect was a mid-level capo named Victor. He was a man who currently stood near the towering champagne fountain across the room, sweating profusely despite the heavy air conditioning, constantly dabbing his forehead with a silk handkerchief. I kept my hand lightly on Dominic's arm as we navigated the crowd, accepting forced, terrified pleasantries from rival bosses and crooked politicians. Every time someone looked at me a second too long, Dominic would subtly shift his massive frame, completely blocking their line of sight and sending them a glare so lethal they immediately backed away. But my focus remained entirely on the structural anomalies of the room. I analyzed the placement of the guards, the flow of the waitstaff, and the subtle shifts in body language. I leaned closely into Dominic, pretending to whisper a sweet, romantic nothing into his ear for the benefit of the watching crowd. "Victor is positioned by the south exits," I murmured, my voice icy and steady. "His personal security detail is entirely missing, and he keeps checking his watch every 30 seconds. The Brooklyn shipment schedules coincide exactly with the catering shift change. The hit is happening tonight, Dominic. I calculate it will occur within the next 3 minutes." Dominic did not break his charming, terrifying public smile. His large hand tightened imperceptibly on my waist, branding me through the dark velvet of my gown. "Good girl," he whispered deeply, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to my temple. "Stay exactly behind me. Do not move from my shadow." Dominic gave a barely noticeable hand signal to Leo. The massive underboss nodded once and began moving silently through the dense crowd, signaling the rest of the inner circle to secure the perimeter. But the East Coast hitmen were already inside, perfectly disguised as the catering waitstaff rolling out the secondary dinner service. I saw a tall waiter reach deep into a silver serving cart, his hand wrapping around the grip of a suppressed submachine gun. Time seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. My analytical brain rapidly calculated the trajectory, the distance, and the impending panic of the trapped crowd. "Gun," I stated sharply. Dominic moved with the blinding speed of a feral predator. He shoved me forcefully behind a massive, reinforced marble pillar, just as the first shots shattered the crystal chandeliers directly above where we had been standing. Deafening screams erupted in the ballroom. Shards of glass and plaster rained down like deadly confetti. The staccato pop of suppressed gunfire from the assassins was instantly drowned out by the thunderous, deafening roar of Leo and Dominic's men returning fire with absolute, merciless precision. I crouched low behind the cold marble pillar, my heart hammering violently against my ribs, but my mind remained terrifyingly clear. I counted the shots, tracking the movement of the attackers through the reflections in the shattered mirrors lining the walls. Dominic stood over me, like a protective gargoyle, a terrifying force of nature, his own heavy weapon drawn and firing. He was a human shield of solid muscle and bespoke wool, taking down 3 men before they could even clear the serving stations. The skirmish was bloody, brutal, and over in less than 2 minutes. The Russo men were simply too well trained and heavily armed for a surprise ambush to succeed. The remaining assassins dropped their weapons, falling to their knees on the blood-soaked carpet in total surrender. Silence descended on the ruined, smoky ballroom, broken only by the whimpers of the terrified, crouching guests. Dominic did not sheath his weapon. He walked slowly, deliberately across the room toward Victor, who was desperately trying to crawl on his hands and knees out the south exit. Leo stepped on Victor's hand, dragged the traitor back by his expensive collar, and threw him forcefully at Dominic's feet. "You thought you could sell me out to the East Coast, Victor." Dominic's voice was a low, demonic whisper that carried clearly through the entire silent hall. "You thought you could bleed my docks dry, and I would not notice the missing funds? It was not my fault, boss!" Victor sobbed pathetically, pleading for his life, his face pressed against the ruined carpet. "They threatened my family. The books were cooked perfectly, I swear. Nobody could have possibly known about the roting numbers." Dominic turned his head slowly, looking back at me where I stood safely behind the pillar, brushing a layer of dust off my pristine velvet dress. His dark eyes softened for a fraction of a second before turning back to Victor with lethal, empty hatred. "You underestimated the woman standing in this room," Dominic stated coldly. "Clara tore through your pathetic, heavily encrypted offshore accounts in a single afternoon. She is the brilliant mind that guards my empire. And because of her, you are out of time." Dominic raised his weapon and ended Victor's betrayal with a single, echoing shot. The crowd flinched violently, but absolutely nobody dared to speak or run. Dominic holstered his gun and walked calmly back to me. He ignored the carnage, the blood, and the terrified onlookers. He reached out, his large hands gently cupping my face, his thumbs wiping away a smudge of plaster from my cheek, inspecting me frantically for any sign of a scratch. "Are you hurt, Mia Cara?" he demanded, his voice tight with lingering, violent adrenaline. "I am perfectly fine, Dominic," I replied, my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly as I reached up to straighten his crooked bow tie. "However, I think we need to rapidly recalculate our quarterly projections. The cleanup costs and hush money for the Palmer house are going to be astronomically high this month." A dark, rumbling laugh escaped deep from his chest, shocking everyone in the room who had just witnessed him execute a man in cold blood. He pulled me flush against his hard chest, crashing his lips down onto mine, kissing me fiercely, deeply, and possessively right in front of the entire criminal underworld. It was a brand, a definitive declaration, and a lethal warning all rolled into one. "Listen to me, all of you," Dominic commanded, breaking the kiss but keeping me tightly wrapped in his arms. His voice boomed across the silent, ruined ballroom. "Clara Jenkins is the undisputed queen of the Russo Syndicate. She holds my heart, my life, and my ledgers. Anyone who looks at her with disrespect, anyone who questions her place by my side, will face a fate far worse than what you just witnessed." He looked down at me, the dark obsession in his eyes burning brighter and hotter than ever before. I was not just the heavy woman who sat in the corner doing the taxes anymore. I was the architect of his empire, the shadow behind his throne, and the only person in the entire world who could tame the monster of Chicago. "Let us go home, my beautiful queen," Dominic whispered, leading me safely out of the carnage. "We have an empire to run." Thank you so much for listening to this dark mafia romance story. If you loved Clara and Dominic's intense journey and satisfying revenge, please hit that like button and share this video with your fellow dark romance readers. Do not forget to leave a comment down below telling me what trope you want to hear next, and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on so you never miss a new story time. Stay safe, and see you in the next video.